Tara St Andrews. It's Miss Thomas here with today's pre-recorded session. I'm going to continue reading our class novel, Who's Afraid of the Bwgan Wood? Chapter 4, Bwganod. The noise of the gate opening echoed faintly, but clearly across the wasteland. A few minutes later, there was a second groaning screech as Sharon went through and a clang as she shut it behind her. Voices were raised at the distance. Then they too faded away. The old ironworks was silent and still in the dusk. Humans and dogs had all gone home. Then the eyes which had been watching the children blinked a few times. The bushes at the side of the bridge rustled slightly, and two misty pale shapes like wisps of cloud, faintly tinted with different colours and shimmering at the edges with a strange purple light, rose silently out of the undergrowth and drifted upwards. When they came to rest in the branches above the river, the mists shrank and got more and more solid and harder to see through until they turned into Tatty Bwgan and Bwgan. Bwgan eyes were round and scared. Have they gone yet? All of them? Tatty Bwgan floated above the treetops until she could see the path in both directions. Every last one, she reported, and the gates are shut. Dio sighed with relief. The tricks they'd been playing had been against the rules, and Dio was a worrier. We'll get caught one of these days, he said, and then what? Tatty's face was alight with mischief. Don't be such a misery guts. Nobody's ever around to see, and they can't see us at all. One of them knew about us, though. I heard them talking. Tatty shrugged. So what? Anyway, you were laughing as much as I was when we tipped the old nest onto the big girl's head. Dio giggled in spite of himself. The look on her face. And wasn't it funny when Tew said hello and they all ran away? That had been the funniest thing of all. Bwganod can see in the dark, so Tatty and Dio hadn't missed a thing. The more they thought about the heavy, clumsy humans galumphing around down the path, squeaking with fright, and the puzzled look the owl had given them before shrugging and swooping away, the funnier it became. Now that they were alone and didn't have to be careful, Tatty and Dio laughed out loud until their insides ached. Wicked, Dio gasped. And the best bit is, we didn't actually do a thing. It was Tew who got them really scared, and she's just an owl. Tatty sniffed. We could have scared them much worse than that if we'd wanted to. I know, but we're not allowed. So don't even think about it, Tat. Stupid old rules, Tatty grumbled. Bet I could have scared them worse than you, though. Bet you couldn't. Oh, yeah? Watch this. The shimmering purplish edges of Tatty swelled up and changed colour, and all at once she was a huge, scaly monster with blood dripping from her fangs. Pathetic, scoffed Dio, and changed himself into a great, big, bloodshot eyeball with claws. The monster snarled horribly and breathed out unreal fire. Then it opened its mouth wider and wider until all its insides spilled out. The dreadful apparition shimmered and shrank, and there was Tatty again, in her normal shape. Not bad, said the eyeball grudgingly. Come on, said Tatty, let's go and see Tew. They found the barn owl perched on top of a derelict chimney among the ruins of the old foundry. Hi, Tew, said Dio cheerfully. What? Oh, hello, the owl said. She was staring intently at the ground far below, watching with her keen night vision for tiny movements in the long grass. Fancy a game too, said Tatty. Well, actually, Two said apologetically, I'm a bit, she stiffened. Excuse me, and a millisecond later she was gone. Looking down, Tatty and Dio saw the silent, feathered bullet that was Tew streaking at incredible speed into the tangled grass. At the very last instant, she braked. The huge taloned feet shot out, the big wings rode the air without a sound, and a moment later she was sitting in a tree 20 yards away with a mouse in her beak. Tatty and Dio could see the tail quite clearly in the moonlight. Tew turned away politely while she swallowed it, head first. Oh, I wish she wouldn't do that, Dio said, shuddering. What? Disappear all the time? No, the mice. I like mice. She's got to eat like everybody else, said Tatty wisely. If she didn't, we'd be up to the eyeballs in them and everybody else would starve. They knew there was no point in hanging around while Tew was hunting. Instead, the two Bwganod drifted away to where the little Cairo River tumbled in waterfalls down the steep cliffs at the furthest end of the old ironworks. Above the cliffs was the secret valley and the woods where their family lived. Wonder if Eldon's back yet, Tatty remarked as they flew. Dio made a face. Shouldn't think so. We could ask around, I suppose. Eldon was a special friend of theirs and great fun to be with. But there was a snag. He was one of the Tylwyth Teg, whom some people call the elves, or the fair folk, or the children of the city. Anybody who knew elves will tell you that you can't rely on them to stay in one place for long. They're here one moment and gone the next, and no one, least of all the elves themselves, knows when or where they'll turn up again. 3 nights ago, the Cairo Valley had echoed with their music and their laughter and glimmered with the light that shines out of their golden hair. Tonight, everywhere was dark and silent. Tatty and Dio knew from experience that Eldon could be away for a week, or a year, or 20 years. They also knew that whenever he did appear again, he'd carry on with a conversation or a game or a song at the exact point where he'd left it. And he didn't seem to understand when you tried to explain that time had passed, and a lot of other things had happened in between. He just thought you were teasing him. Bwgan Tide said their time is different from ours, said Dio. Tatty frowned. I don't see how it can be, do you? I mean, time is just time, isn't it? It's because they exist in a lot of different worlds at once, Bwgan Tide said. Tatty thought about it and gave up in disgust. Oh, sounds loopy to me. By now, they'd reached their grandparents' Bwgan house. Their grandfather was outside, puffing at his pipe and looking gloomy. Slung out of my own house, he grumbled, with a list of jobs to do as long as your arm. Why? What's Nino doing? Making new pillows. Their faces fell. Oh no! Making fresh pillows out of willow herb fluff was something Bwgan Nino did every autumn, and it was the messiest, fiddliest, tickliest job you could possibly imagine. You had to pick out all the tiny seeds one by one, and the fluff got up your nose and made you sneeze. Why does she bother? Dio said. She doesn't have to. In their Bwgan house, they managed perfectly well without any pillows at all. Try telling them that, said Bwgan Tide sourly, meaning Nino and her Bwgan house. Bwgan Nino was one of those people who can't bear to be without anything to do. If she wasn't cleaning, she was baking, and if she wasn't baking, she was brewing or knitting or sewing or mending things, or, as at present, making willow herb pillows. And one of them foreign quilt things to go on the bed, Bwgan said gloomily. I wish I'd never asked them Norwegian kobolds to stay last summer, I'm telling you straight. Tatty and Dio fidgeted a bit and glanced sideways at each other. Well, better be going, I suppose, said Tatty hastily. See you later, Tide, said Dio. Tell Nino we were called. And rather guiltily, they made their escape. We could have stayed to help, I suppose, said Dio. No way, Tatty said firmly. Last time I helped Nino with pillows, I sneezed for a whole week. Nobody in the Cairo woods had seen Eldon or his family. Tatty and Dio floated rather disconsolately back down the cliffs to the old ironworks. As they were skirting the smelly patch of oily swamp near the old railway yard, they almost fell over Gwrach Reuben, who had crawled out of her pool and was snuffling along the path. She was covered in mud and slime and duckweed dripping from her long green hair. Watch where you're going, can't you? Oh, sorry, they said together, and backed hastily out of her way. Gwrach Reuben was a powerful witch, and it wasn't wise to upset her. That's the trouble with kids these days, she complained, glaring at them from under her hair. No respect. Always rushing about, barging past you, never a please nor a thank you. Wasn't like that when I was a girl. Do you know, had a bit of respect in them days. Tatty and Dio tried their best to imagine Gwrach Reuben as a girl at their age. It was impossible. We were just looking for Eldon, Dio explained very politely. You don't happen to have seen him around, do you? No, I haven't, the witch snapped. Don't want to neither. Elves, she added bitterly, ought to be a law, keeping respectable people awake all hours with that rock music. Good riddance, that's what I say. Is your Nino in? Tatty blinked in surprise. Yes, I think so. I'm just going up there to borrow a cup of sugar. Elves indeed. And away she went, crawling and snuffling, still muttering about elves. Oh, that's one visitor Nino could do without, said Dio under his breath, when he was sure she was far enough away not to hear him. Nino can handle her, said Tatty confidently. Come on. Chapter 5, Humans. Half an hour later, Tatty and Dio were sitting in the topmost fork of a beech tree and looking doleful. Oh, I don't believe this, Dio said gloomily. Everybody's busy tonight. Nobody wants to talk to us, or have fun, or anything. Miserable lot, said Tatty, and it's such a perfect night too. It was. There was a huge, bright harvest moon shining golden overhead. The air was almost as warm as summer, but mixed in with the drowsy scents of buddleia and late meadowsweet and fresh grass, there was the darker, sharper smell of leaf mould. Autumn was on its way. It was a night for exploring and having adventures, for excitement and mischief and fun. Eldon would have been the perfect companion on a night like this, but Eldon had gone away. Tatty gazed at the little twinkling lights of the estate on the hill, and past them, lower down, at the harsh yellow glare of the sodium lights in Nantycaerw, Newtown. And into her head came an idea so new and so daring it took her breath away. Humans play, she said. Dio stared at her. But they can't see us, and anyway, we're not allowed. The rules were very strict on this point. A bit of mischief now and again, perhaps. Even the rules had to admit that you can't expect Bwgan to keep out of mischief. But otherwise, no dealings with humans. Humans were dangerous, dirty, and not to be trusted, the grown-ups said. Tatty shrugged. Okay, forget it, just an idea, that's all. But Dio was thinking it over, and his eyes began to sparkle. We could go and see where they live, he suggested. It wouldn't do any harm, would it, just looking? They'd never tried to explore the places where humans lived, partly because there'd always been plenty to do and lots of friends around, partly because of the rules, but mainly because nobody had ever thought of such a thing before. What about the fence? There were iron railings all around the old ironworks to try to stop people dumping their rubbish there. The Bwgan had been warned about iron, of course. Iron was the most dangerous thing of all. If you touched it, you were trapped. You couldn't float away, or dissolve, or change shape or anything. You were stuck and helpless. It was just as well for Tatty and Dio that there wasn't much iron inside the old ironworks anymore. Everything had long ago rusted into ruin. And of course, they had always kept well away from the wrecks of old cars and the broken fridges and the rest of the rubbish. We just fly over it, said Dio, no problem at all. Tatty began to grin. It's worth a try. Let's go. In a few minutes, they were looking down on the roofs of the estate. At this time of night, all the streets were deserted. 1 or 2 cars raced by with a deafening noise and a gust of exhaust fumes, which made the Bwgan cough. But otherwise, all the humans were indoors. The estate seemed very strange to Tatty and Dio. The houses were like boxes, all almost exactly the same, and they were all quite dead. It's the stuff they made of, Tatty guessed, and she was right. Wood and stone are natural things and alive in their own slow, dreaming way, like the old farmhouses high up on the mountain above the Cairo Valley. But bricks and tiles and concrete blocks are man-made and lifeless. They could sense iron everywhere, and lots of other metals too, and this reminded them to be extra careful. As they flew along a street between rows of gardens, Dio pulled a couple of tall, smooth sticks out of a flower bed. If you want to touch something, poke it with this. Good thinking, Tatty nodded. Most of the gardens were lawns with a few shrubs growing here and there. Bwgan have a special closeness with trees of all kinds, so Tatty and Dio dropped down to say hello. But the shrubs were mostly foreign and didn't want to talk. Either they don't understand what we're saying to them, or they've forgotten how, said Dio. All that smoke and pollution and stuff, I expect, said Tatty. Just then, a lady walked up one of the driveways, pressed a little lighted button at the side of the door, and made chime sound. Cling, clong. A moment later, the door opened and she went inside. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, said Tatty, and Dio grinned. Using their sticks, they poked all the lighted buttons on all the doors in the street, flying very fast from one house to the next. In a few moments, every door in the whole street was wide open, and people were walking into the road and asking each other what on earth was going on, and arguing about who the culprits were. Tatty and Dio watched the commotion with glee. Feeling bolder now, they flew to the next street and cautiously peeped in at a lighted window. They knew about glass from talking to the old farmhouses. Glass wasn't dangerous. It was just a barrier. 4 humans were sitting in the room. It was Sally Ann's house, but of course the Bwgan didn't know that. They were all facing the same way, and all 4 were staring at something just below the level of the sill. Tatty and Dio couldn't see what it was, but they could see the ghostly, flickering reflections which the thing cast over the rest of the room. The humans weren't talking much, just watching the thing, and their faces looked blank and bored. Tatty flew up a bit higher. One of the human children glanced up for an instant and gave Tatty a nasty fright. But the next moment he'd looked away and was staring at the thing again. They really can't see us, can they? Dio marvelled. Is it weird or what? Tatty floated boldly to the middle of the big window and flapped her arms. Oi, you in there, she yelled. Yoo-hoo! Anybody home? And she turned herself into a gigantic toad. Nobody moved or so much as glanced in her direction. The two Bwganod began to have fun. They flew across the window, taking it in turns to change into the most horrific illusions they could think of. They made rude faces through the glass, they stuck their fingers into the corner of their mouths and crossed their eyes and waggled their tongues. The humans just sat there, staring, gazing straight at them, with blank faces, and didn't see a thing. Tatty and Dio were laughing so much that they didn't hear a snuffling, scuffling noise in the bushes under the window. So when a deep, gruff voice said, "Hey, who's there? Hey!" very loudly indeed, right behind them, they nearly jumped out of their skins with fright. "Butcher," said Tatty when she recovered. The dog peered short-sightedly at them and sniffed suspiciously. Then he began to grin and wag his tail. "Oh, it's you! Hello there!" Butcher was one of the dogs who came through the old ironworks each day on his walk. The Bwganod knew him quite well. "What on earth are you two doing here?" he asked curiously. "Not your scene, really, I shouldn't have thought." Just having a look around, that's all," Dio explained. "You don't mind, do you?" Tatty asked politely. Butcher looked quite pleased. "Good grief, no. Nice to see a friendly face now and again. Tell you what," he offered, "I give you one of my exclusive conducted tours if you like. All sorts of interesting things to sniff at round here if you know where to go. There's a particularly niffy dead rat I've been saving for a special occasion like this. We could go and roll in it if you like." No thanks," the Bwganod said hastily. Butcher looked quite offended. "Oh, if that's how you feel about it, suit yourselves. Just trying to be friendly, that's all." "Oh, it's really kind of you, Butcher," Dio assured him. "We do appreciate the offer, honestly. It's just the dead rats aren't really our thing. Know what I mean?" Tatty was more interested in the weird, flickering lights inside the human's room. "What are they looking at in there?" "Oh, that thing." Butcher didn't bother to hide his disgust. "That's the telly. Dreadful thing. Can't see the point in it myself. Smells awful, and when you go too close, your fur crackles. Nasty, noisy contraption. Sure you'd rather not have a sniff at that rat?" "Positive," Tatty said firmly. "Sorry, Butcher. Thanks anyway." The curtains were drawn across all the other windows in Mostyn Close. Tatty and Dio peered through the gaps upstairs and downstairs. They saw families washing up in the kitchen. They saw older children arguing and doing homework and listening to radios, and younger children getting ready for bed. And lots of people watching the mysterious telly that Butcher had told them about. "I always thought humans were filthy," Tatty said in astonishment. "But they're quite clean and tidy, really, aren't they?" Up to now, all they'd known about humans had been the disgusting mess they'd left all over the old ironworks. The cans and bottles and sweet wrappings and old newspapers, as well as the polystyrene trays from the takeaways, the black plastic bags of rotting garbage and other rubbish. At the furthest end of the estate, there was a row of houses without upstairs windows. Here too, the rooms were all snugly curtained off from the glorious moonlight, except for the last one in the row, where the curtains were open and light streamed out across the lawn. The Bwganod hovered outside and looked in. There was only one human inside the room, a very thin, wrinkly human with white hair sticking out from under the flat brown cap he wore. He was sitting in a big chair with a checked rug tucked around his knees. He had huge, bony, knuckly hands which rested on his lap as though they were too big and too heavy for the rest of him. His eyes were closed. He was asleep. "He must be ever so old," Dio whispered in awe. "Even Bwgan looks younger than that, and Bwgan would be 864 years old next birthday." Then they saw what was standing in full view in the corner of the room, and immediately forgot everything else. For there, in a squarish brown box, was Tew, the barn owl. Tatty and Dio gasped with shock. The owl in the box took no notice of them. It bent down, preened its feathered toes, and then, to their utter astonishment, it got smaller until it was a white dot sitting on the branch of a tiny tree. Then it raised its wings and flew away into the box. "Tew!" Dio wailed, horrified. He grabbed Tatty's arm. "He's got Tew in that box. We've got to do something." Tatty had been worried too, for a few startled moments, but now she thought she understood. "Don't be silly, it's not real. It's a magic box that shows pictures of things like Eldon's mother's looking glass." "Oh," said Dio. There was another owl inside the box now, a huge brown one with ear tufts and fierce yellow eyes. Other owls flew to and fro, talking to each other in foreign accents. Dio was utterly entranced. "Oh, it's better than a magic glass," he whispered to Tatty. Tatty was a bit shocked. It seemed somehow disloyal, if not downright wicked, to say that anything humans made was better than elves. "Not bad, I suppose," she admitted grudgingly. "Not bad? It's brilliant! Wish we could hear better, though." He drifted up higher to see. "Hey, there's a little window open up here." And before Tatty could stop him, he'd evaporated through the gap and was inside the human's room. He made rude faces at her through the glass. "Dio, no, come back!" Dio grinned and settled himself on the floor in front of the magic box. Tatty gulped. It was bad enough to have sneaked out of the ironworks without telling anybody where they were going. But what on earth would Mammy Bwgan and Daddy Bwgan say if Dio got himself stuck inside a human house? She'd just have to go in after him and drag him out by force. The window frame was a wooden one, and the metal bar which propped the little top light open was pushed well to one side. Tatty dissolved herself and very carefully oozed through. "Dio, what do you think you're doing? We're not allowed." Usually it was Dio who said things like that to her. They both turned round sharply to stare at the old man. His wrinkled face was set in deep, grumpy folds, and his eyes were still closed. "It's okay," Dio said confidently. "He can't see us or hear us, and we can see the owls much better from here." Tatty wasn't happy. "Well, all right, as long as we get out the instant he wakes up. Understand?" Inside the magic box, owls were feeding their chicks and complaining that the cheeping and squawking was driving them round the bend. A human lady's voice was talking at the same time, but she didn't seem to understand what the owls themselves were saying. "Can't you hear them or something?" Tatty asked, and Dio shrugged. And then, all of a sudden, real, heavy human footsteps sounded just outside the sitting room door. The Bwganod froze. Then Tatty grabbed Dio and dragged him behind the sideboard. Perhaps humans really couldn't see Bwganod, but in a situation like this, Tatty wasn't prepared to take the risk. She and Dio hovered very still between the dusty wall and the even dustier wooden panels of the sideboard and held their breath. The sitting room door opened and a youngish woman came in. She was wearing a coat and carrying a shopping bag. "All right now, Gramps," she said in a loud, too cheerful voice. "I'll just draw the curtains for you and then I'll be off home. Anything else you want before I go?" The old man opened his eyes and looked sourer and grumpier than ever. "You don't have to shout," he told her. "I can hear you quite well without shouting." The woman took no notice. She pulled the curtains across the big window, shutting the little top light as she did so, and picked up a cup and saucer from the table beside the old man's chair. "See you tomorrow then." "All right." "Aye, most likely," the old man said. "Good night then, Gramps." "Good night, Susie." The woman shut the sitting room door behind her. Tatty and Dio heard faint clattering noises coming from somewhere, and the noise of running water. Then the footsteps tapped briskly down the hall, and the front door slammed. The footsteps went on down the concrete path outside and along the pavement until they faded away in the distance. The old man lifted his head and glared round the room. Now that he was properly awake, the eyes under the heavy bushy eyebrows were extremely bright and sharp. "I know you're there," he said. "Come out by here now where I can see you." Tatty and Dio went cold with horror. He'd known they were there all along. "Come out now," he commanded in a stern voice. "I haven't got all night." They looked around frantically for a way of escape. There wasn't one. They were trapped inside a human house with an old man who could actually see them. A human who had a magic box and who might easily be a wizard or even worse. It was a bad moment. Very slowly, they oozed out from behind the sideboard and hovered nervously in front of him. They dared not dissolve or change shape, just in case he did have magical powers they didn't know about. Nasty things can happen to a Bwgan if magic catches you between shapes. The old man looked them up and down. It was hard to tell from his expression whether he was surprised at what he saw or disappointed. "You're not very big, are you?" he said at last. "We will be big one day," said Dio indignantly. We're Bwganod," said Tatty. The grumpy old face began to soften into the beginnings of a smile. "Oh, I can see that," he said. Then he scowled ferociously. "So what in the name of goodness are the pair of you doing in here, haunting a rubbishy new bungalow that's only been up 5 minutes?" He sounded so like Bwgantide in one of his moods that suddenly Tatty found she wasn't afraid of him anymore. And when you looked closely, you could see that his eyes were twinkling under the eyebrows, even though the rest of his face was scowling. "We're not haunting," she said. "Bwganod don't haunt places. We came to see the magic box," Dio explained. "Magic box? What magic box?" Tatty pointed. The owls were flying into the sunset and human writing was rising up in the glass front in rows. The Bwganod couldn't read the words. Gramps was really smiling now. That's not a magic box, boys bach. That's a telly. It's magic to us, said Tatty. A human face had appeared in the box and was talking. Can we see the owls again, please? Dio begged. It turned out that they couldn't. You need a video for that, Gramps said. They didn't ask him what a video was. They had a nasty feeling that even if he did try to explain, they wouldn't understand. The things humans surrounded themselves with seemed to be dreadfully complicated. Instead, they pressed all the buttons on Gramps' magic stick and watched the pictures change one after another until he complained of feeling giddy. The stick itself was a big surprise. It kept slipping and slithering through their fingers as though it was made of ice. Plastic, said Gramps, nodding wisely to himself, and found them a piece of wood to poke the buttons with instead. They had the same problem when he took them into the kitchen to fetch some fizzy lemonade from the fridge. Hold that a minute, will you? Gramps said, thrusting a white plastic box into Tatty's hands while he bent down creakily to rummage inside the fridge. Tatty did her best to hold on, but she couldn't. The box shot out from between her fingers, skidded along the worktop, and knocked a bottle of milk and a tray of eggs onto the floor. Tatty was horrified. Oh, don't you worry about a little thing like that, Gramps told her comfortingly. Her across the road will clean it up in the morning. They didn't like the kitchen much. It was full of dangerous metal. They couldn't cope with the plastic containers, and worst of all, they both began to itch and sneeze. Synthetic, said Gramps. Always knew they were rubbish. You go back in the sitting room where there's a good, honest-to-God wool carpet, and I'll bring you the pop now. Sitting in the sitting room, Tatty and Dio sipped fizzy lemonade out of 2 little pottery bowls with a present from Beta Sequoia written in curly letters on the side, and nibbled chocolate biscuits out of a paper packet. Human food was a bit weird, they decided, but nice. Between mouthfuls of biscuit, they told Gramps all about themselves and all about Mammy Bwgan and Daddy Bwgan and Bwgan Babi and Nino and Tide and the Bwgan house and all their other friends amongst the people of the wood. And Gramps listened and asked questions and laughed out loud and began to look years younger and much happier than when they'd first seen him. Then he told them how he'd got to know about Bwganod. Once, long ago, when he'd been young, he'd seen a Bwgan lady in the Cairo woods. Beautiful she was, long hair down to her knees and flowers on her head like a crown. Didn't see me, though. I was afraid to breathe in case I scared her away. Sounds like Mammy, Tatty said. Aye, wouldn't surprise me. Got a look of her about the pair of you. Especially you, he added, glaring at Tatty. They were used to his grumpy ways by now and weren't put off. I thought you said the lady was pretty, Dio objected. Tatty's not pretty. You shut your mouth, boyo, Gramps told him crossly. Beautiful, I said. Different thing altogether. And that's how your sister's going to be one of these days. You just watch. Tatty blinked and tried not to show how pleased she felt. She knew she wasn't pretty, and it had never worried her in the slightest. In her opinion, pretty girls were a pain. But it was nice to hear somebody say that one day she'd be as beautiful as Mammy. It gave her a warm, glowing feeling inside. Then Gramps told them a bit about himself, how he'd been a coal miner for years and years, working in the stifling, dark underground. He showed them his hands, which were covered all over with little blue marks where he'd been cut and scratched by the coal. Won't wash out, he explained. They're with me for good now. That's where I got this bad chest, see? Pneumoconiosis. 70% dust I got. Can't catch my breath some days. That's why I'm stuck in here on my own and can't get out and about no more. Tatty and Dio were appalled. It seemed such a dreadful way to have lived. Oh no, Gramps said. We had our good times and our bad times like everybody else. Time had passed very quickly, and it was a lot later than any of them had realised. So they all got a nasty shock when they heard the sound of a key being turned in the front door. "It's that nurse," Gramps said. "Come to help me get to bed. Off you go now, quick sharp." He opened the window wide and they wafted through, just in time to hear the sitting room door open and a scolding voice say, "Honestly, Mr. Evans, you'll catch your death with the window wide open like that. And what's all this mess in the kitchen?" They didn't wait to hear Gramps' reply, but headed straight for home. Dio was feeling a little bit peculiar after all the fizzy lemonade. Every time he burped, he shot 2 meters up into the air. "We could go and see him again," Tatty suggested. "He wants us to," Dio agreed. As they flew over the wood, Tatty got rather thoughtful. "I don't think we ought to tell anybody about him, though. Not straight away." "Why? Was it bad what we did?" "No, not exactly, but..." Tatty was struggling with her conscience. If Mammy and Daddy found out where they'd been, they'd have to put a stop to any more visits. Rules were rules after all, and not there to be broken whenever you felt like it. On the other hand, Gramps was so lonely. He'd enjoyed their company, you could tell, and he'd been terribly disappointed if he never saw them again. What do you do in a situation like that? "We didn't do any harm though, did we?" said Dio. "I spilled some milk and broke some eggs," said Tatty glumly. "Yeah, but apart from that, it was okay." "Tell you what," said Tatty, "if they ask where we've been, we'll tell them. But if they don't ask..." "Anyway," said Dio, "the rules don't say we shouldn't watch humans, do they?" And with that thought easing their guilty consciences, they both flew home. I hope you enjoyed the next 2 chapters of the book and look forward to sharing what happens next in another session next week. Keep up all the hard work you're doing at home, keep safe, and I'll see you soon. Da bo chi!